This tutorial will be about using the buffer tool. Buffer tool, kind of like clip, tends to be one of the more popular tools that sticks in everyone's mind. And because very simply, it takes any feature, point, line, or polygon, we're going to do points for this example, and it draws a buffer or a circle around it at a specified radius. Right? The radius is drawn in a Euclidean fashion, and what I mean by that is it's as the crow flies. So it'll continue in a straight line, nothing can interrupt it. This will be different than what we learn later in the year, things called service areas, which are ones that draw, I guess, quote unquote radii, but the radii have to take into account some kind of network. So whether it's a street network or a river network or something else that might inhibit their progress. All right, so the buffer tool, one of the ones, multiple muscle memories. You might not actually see that here. I put that there. We'll review that in a moment. But you can access buffer here. You can access buffer here. So at its simplest, buffer looks like this. You can input the feature. As always, you can choose to save it or let it default. The base thing is to put in some kind of linear unit, so I'll put in 500 feet. Dissolve type is if you want your buffers, let's say you have schools and you have 1,000 schools, but you know that those schools are 3 categories: elementary, middle, and high school. You could have all of the buffers of the elementary be in the same feature part, all of the middle school in the same feature part, rather than having 1,000 individual buffers. For now, we're not going to dissolve, we'll leave it as is. So at its simplest, that's how you run the tool. The tool will run. We're zoomed out a little bit, but if we zoom in, right, we'll be able to see that we've drawn the correct number of buffers around our place. Now, I don't know if this will happen on your computer. I've been noticing an odd thing when I run buffers. Sometimes it dissolves them, sometimes it does not. So I'm hoping this won't be the case when you run into this yourself, but we'll see. Buffer also has a great option where you can buffer by a field, right? So imagine I've built this one on my own. Oops, I don't want to intersect the buffers themselves. I want to intersect intersectors. Right, so I built one in here, feet, where I randomly generated a number. It's fairly meaningless, but you could imagine something like you have a series of objects you want to buffer, and you beforehand give them a score, and that score determines how far they're buffered. Or maybe you have a street shape file that's just center lines, but somewhere in that data is how wide the street is. And you can use that to help you create polygons for the streets, right? So it's just different rather than everything's by the same unit. Everything will be a different unit depending on what's stored here in the feet field. Like I said, I just randomly put this together, so these are going to be meaningless. But if I hit OK, all kinds of different shapes and sizes depending on whatever I put in their field, compared to the original one that I did where everything was 500. Also possible you might want to do something called a multiple ring buffer, right? So if you need multi-buffers. This is a neat way of interacting with the tool, but I'm going to show you a better way. If you go to Customize, Customize Mode, Commands, same place we found Pixel Inspector, you can type in something called the Buffer Wizard. You can drag it and put it anywhere you want. You can dock it here. I usually dock it up here. And this is a great way to kind of talk you through buffering. Very interactive. What would you like to buffer? Well, I'd like to buffer my intersections. This is how many you'd be buffering. What's the distance? Probably the only flawed part. You control the units down here. Right? You can also do the field if you need. And you can control multiple rings here too. Right? So maybe we're going to do 3 different rings, and each one is going to be 500 feet. Dissolve barriers is where you get the option, right? If 2 things hit each other, they can merge into one. Keep everything similar. We'll do that. So if anything hits each other, it merges. Don't have this option right now because we're doing multiple ring buffers and we're buffering a point. But if you buffered a polygon, right, you'd be able to buffer going inside and outside. So it would buffer towards the inside and the outside. You could make sure it doesn't go inside the polygon. You could make sure it only goes inside, right? So let's say you have some kind of shape where you're trying to figure out the distance from the edges. That's what only inside would be. And then outside the polygon, and include inside is just when you're buffering both. So I'm going to run it. It's going to take me some time here. I didn't think this one through. Right, and there we go. We've created 3 rings. They've dissolved into one another at any instances in which they intersect. And this is the multiple ring buffer.